Statistics state, theoretical evidence dictates that I am to be high or dead right now. The fact that I'm not is A, miraculous, equaling a miracle, and B, it defies logic.
Right.
So I'm here to say, like, the disease of addiction is not a death sentence.
Right.
And as long as you're breathing, it's never too late. Your history does not have to dictate your future, but it can most certainly guide and direct it. So unfortunately, this doesn't come with an instruction manual, a black and white, one-size-fits-all type deal.
Brandon Novak, welcome to Not So Hollywood. This is a very un-Hollywood visit, because you live in Philadelphia. So
I do.
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah.
But, we were talking, you have some fans in the room. Let's just put it that way, because we grew up on Viva La Bam and Jackass. That was our era. And then
I apologize for that.
but that was, listen, you guys set the stage for TikTok and YouTube and all these stunts happening right now on the internet. Am I right?
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing to say the very least. So you see these younger generations and the generational gap. Right? It makes me feel a bit dated, but
I'm old too. Don't worry.
But the 40s is the 30s, 30s is the 20s.
Let's hope so. I feel it at least.
I dig my age now, and I wouldn't want to go back to where I was.
Well, definitely not. And we're going to get into that in a second. Also, you went through this harrowing journey that you've written about more than once, because you're an author, best-selling author.
Yeah.
You struggled with heroin addiction for many, many years. Been sober for 8 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, I just celebrated 8 years last week.
And congratulations, because guess what? You win a car. No, I'm kidding. That actually,
I felt like I was on The Price is Right for a moment there. Like,
that's
wow.
the TV host in me. No, what's fascinating about it, I read, is that 5/25 is your day of sobriety, and also my wedding anniversary, and also my son's birthday. So we were both doing lots of celebrating on that day.
So a lot of birthdays and significant things took place on that day. It's a big deal. I'm a big numbers guy.
Me too. Girl, that is. Where are you today?
Today, I'm just in this really and this is at the moment, because as we know, anything could change within a day, an hour, a phone call, a email. But I'm in this really peaceful Zen mode. I'm at this point in life where acceptance is kind of the answer to everything. And what I've learned, that all I have control over in this life is my thinking, my attitude, and my behavior, my reactions to his, or its actions. Right? So
totally.
The moment that I walk through this world and I start placing these expectations on you, all I've just done is set myself up for an unrealistic, when I place these expectations on people, all I'm doing is setting myself up for an unfulfilled resentment.
Right.
Right? Because it's not a question of if or when you'll let me down. It's just,
well, how do you get to the place of contentment? Because I find that sometimes to be really hard, especially with so much consumption from, TikTok and Instagram, and also trying to fulfill our own destinies and be the best at what we do. Everything is on overload. I can't take it anymore. And I do think that detracts from just sitting in it and being content with what we have, with what we're doing.
For me, I got to this position through just a lot of failure, a lot of disappointments, a lot of frustration and anger. Right? Where I got to in my life today was basically through process of elimination, but backwards. I had failed so many times, so many years, at so many things, that ultimately the last thing I tried ended up to be the first thing that worked. And in my life, what it looks like is it's live forward and learn backwards.
Live forward, learn backwards.
So now, having finally done the internal work that was required in order to achieve the external results that I've always desired, it's very easy for me to look back and recognize the synchronicity in life's events that have led me to the here and now, that prove to me my higher power has been doing so much more for me than I could ever fathom.
What is keeping you, because you're sober now, as we said, 8 years sober. What's keeping you sober today?
the fact that I really took heed to my mentors and the things that they shared with me early on in the beginning. So you asked what got me to this position, and ultimately it was just a lot of pain, right? And
Yeah.
the
You
pain,
hopefully went through some, I mean, it's terrible to say, but hopefully people can learn from your story, all the pain you went through, and we can kind of stop people who are going down the wrong track
well,
in that path.
that's the point. That's the why behind my whole statement is that, right, the demographic that I'm dealing with, meaning addicts and alcoholics, are
Hmm.
generally defiant by nature. We hate authority and we refuse to conform, right? Because we possess this
Check,
job,
check, check. There's
right?
like 15
Yeah,
people surrounding me, including myself, by the way. I always question if I drink too much. But
sure.
there's like 15 people in my life I could be like, well, that applies to
No
you.
doubt. Because I possess this job that consists of knowing everything, right? And
Hmm.
furthermore, my resume states that I do know some things because I've done some things in life prior to sobriety that people would equate to success, happiness, potentially even dream of doing.
And let's get into that for a second.
Yeah.
Not to cut you off, but I'm going to cut you off.
Totally. But wait, real quick before we get into that, so I
Okay.
can make a point. People don't think I'm just insane with these open-ended questions
Yeah.
that I'm not following through with. Understanding that that's the wheelhouse, the demographic that I'm addressing on a daily basis. What I do is I use my social media platforms, the numbers that I've been blessed with, the followers that are into my stuff, and I use it to deliver my message in a form of attraction rather than promotion, so that God willing they find it so appealing, so desirable, and so attractive that they'll like be willing to do whatever it takes to get what I may have, which is really just
Hmm.
peace and
Hmm.
freedom from not only active addiction and alcoholism, but just the my mind,
Yeah.
which is the most important thing. So if they buy into kind of what I'm showing on my platforms, then like here's my number, here's my connections, reach out and let's do this thing together.
Well, God, there's just so much to your story, isn't there? And now I think what's attractive to people is that you've cleaned it up and you're sober and
Yeah.
you're doing so well and you're spreading the word. But you document. Okay, so I read Dreamseller cover to
Yeah.
cover. I said you were in bed with me for the past couple
I
weeks.
know. It's been a long time since a woman's told me
Wasn't
that. I'm
that
a single man
fun?
that lives with 3 cats.
Oh,
I'm a strange fellow. So a woman in bed with me for 3 days
well, you were in
consecutively
my
is
bed
impressive.
actually.
Let me feel good for a little bit. Come on.
So I read Dreamseller
Yeah.
cover to cover, and you do document the heroin journey.
Yeah.
Um, you also point out how so much of it is genetic,
Yeah.
right? But also you had your story with your dad who was an addict,
Yeah.
and you were basically a pro skateboarder at such an early age and immersed in this life with Bam Margera and making movies, and then MTV comes along. Like, how much of it for you was also too much too soon versus the genetic component?
As an addict and an alcoholic, none of it was too much too soon. Like my starting point is like all of it with everything in life. That's just
Mm.
kind of the way I'm wired. So it wasn't that. It was just that I was unarmed about the facts of what I was up against. I underestimated the opponent that I was in the ring with, which was alcoholism and addiction. And because it was genetically predisposed, my father was an addict, his father was an addict.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand what I was in for until I was in for it. And then I kind of had given my dream, my goal, my love of skateboarding to addiction, lost everything, and Bam had extended an offer to let me move in with him to be on Viva La Bam and skateboard with him and Jackass later. But deep down inside, I knew that like this was only for a short period of time. Like as much as I wanted to accept the keys to the kingdom and really take advantage of this new opportunity that was being presented to me on a silver plate, right? I knew that it was short lived because like my disease of addiction never like would stop. I would not do the things that were needed in order to suppress it once and for all.
And
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking along those lines, and I meant to say this earlier. With all the stuff we're talking about, the social media and all the stuff that you're caught up in helping people spreading the word, do you think, how do you deal with the source, which is that addiction? Does it kind of get buried into the publicity and now I'm doing this? Or is it like, no, every day I'm getting up and that addiction's first and that's how I can go out and help people?
Hmm.
Like,
like
has it kind of
focusing on
taken
the
over of all, has all this now kind of taken
eclipsed.
over, eclipsed it? Thank you, Adriana. Eclipsed.
There it is. Ding, ding, ding. Has it eclipsed?
Are you
Oh,
as
he can jump in too.
okay?
We let him
Cool.
on once in a while,
There we
depending
go.
on how
There we
good
go.
he's been the night before.
Well. Again, no. It because I was so broken, beaten, in a position of just despair and hopelessness in the beginning. Walking into my 13th treatment center, literally, had just come to after being on life support for 7 days. The day before entering this facility, everything that I owned consisted of 8 scarves, 2 jackets, 3 socks, a stick of deodorant, a needle, a spoon, and a restraining order. At 38 years old, right? Like I was the kind of heroin addict and alcoholic at that point that wanted to kill himself on a daily basis. I just didn't want to hurt myself in the process.
Wow.
And I was terrible at suicide because I kept waking up. But when I went in there, I didn't know if it was the first time, the last time, if I was actually going to stay sober. But what I did know to be true is that the pain was so great, I was willing to do anything they suggested just to feel a little bit better. And they would say things to me like, if you stick to the basics, you never have to go back to the basics. Therefore, like, I remember what they told me when they said, look, you suffer with a disease called alcoholism, not alcoholism. You cannot stay sober on yesterday's sobriety, right? So therefore, I remain very proactive in my sobriety. I do the same few things I did then when I was in inpatient treatment that I do today when
Which
I
are?
wake up. I wake up, I start my day on my knees. I ask God to kind of guide me throughout the day and allow me to make decisions that He would see fit for me in order to help as many of His children, which are my brothers and sisters. I do my best to come from a position of understanding as opposed to being understood. And I really just try to be the best human I can be on a daily basis.
And then do you call some of your people
Yeah,
in the program?
I
You
have
got
like
that
a
ritual?
sponsor. I'm heavily invested in a 12-step program. I have
Is that
sponsees.
the only thing that works? Because a lot of people say that. It's like you got to follow the program.
Well, that's the complexity of the situation at large, right? Because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, we are losing. Right? The numbers are they're dark, they're drab, they're unappealing, they're defeating. But then you get a guy like me who says, look, the fact that statistics state, theoretical evidence dictates that I am to be high or dead right now. The fact that I'm not is A, miraculous, equaling a miracle, and B, it defies logic.
Right.
So I'm here to say, like, the disease of addiction is not a death sentence.
Right.
And as long as you're breathing, it's never too late. Your history does not have to dictate your future, but it can most certainly guide and direct it. So unfortunately, this doesn't come with an instruction manual, a black and white, one size fits all type deal, right? People came to me and said, "Why was it treatment center number 13
That's
that
what
worked?"
I want to know. Because it was 525. That just
Why?
no, but
I mean,
why
to
was
me,
it?
yes.
Like, what made it that time stick?
Well, that's the thing. Facility number 13 didn't tell me anything that 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 had missed. They really did not. A combination of things had taken place. A series of events had occurred, and the stars aligned ultimately. And looking back, right? Because everything I know today, I did not know when I was in the process of trying to find sobriety. Looking back, what I know to be true is not one of those attempts were failures. Right? Whether I got kicked out of treatment, whether I left and got high, these seeds were being planted unbeknownst to me.
Yeah.
So 22 years later, 13th treatment center later, I walk in, the pain becomes great enough. I've gotten to this age where I've hit this maturity level to where I realize that this outcome is no longer acceptable, that I continuously place myself in this position, which means I am to be accountable for this. I started to look at the part that I played and realize that, like, all I had been doing for 20 years was rearranging the furniture on the Titanic. My ship sank every time, and the common denominators in my problem were me. And maybe if I just get out of my way and be willing and open-minded just long enough to reach my hand out and say, I can't, but maybe you can you guide me? The craziest thing happened. My life started getting better.
Oh, well, that's the thing with addiction, right?
It was so, but see, the thing is, because I possess that job that consists of knowing everything, I don't believe anyone that ends up in addiction or alcoholism gets here because we took the short bus to school. Quite the contrary. We end up here because we're too smart for our own goddamn
too smart,
good.
too sensitive.
And then I'll sit in this seat that has
Yeah.
the ability to save my life, and I'll fucking outthink myself right out of it.
Well, what's crazy too is what you brought up before, which is that you had not only this incredible talent that most people would dream of, right? Most young boys to be an incredible skater.
Yeah.
And then you have everything handed to you on the silver platter and you throw it all away. But it's the age old story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of these, of, you know, a lot of times actors or musicians, people in the arts for some reason often, and they've got all this, everything at their disposal, but then you throw it away. And it's like, us as bystanders, we want to shake the person, but really you have to do it.
Rightfully so.
I'm totally switching gears for a minute, but on the book, just because I loved it so much and I want to really detail a couple things, you were not sober when the book was published. In fact, you were still using, but you wrote some of the book high on cocaine, you said.
The majority of it, heavily intoxicated with red wine and loads of cocaine.
You weren't using heroin at the time.
No, because at the time, living with Bam and doing the Viva La Bam stuff, and they just were unequipped with the information of addiction and alcoholism. It was okay for me to drink and do blow here and there because that was more of a socially acceptable thing, right?
I see.
I wouldn't, when I did those things, I wouldn't fall asleep in mid conversation. I wouldn't like steal your wallet or your car or fall asleep while driving in total thing, you know, like.
But that's how desperate the drug is. Meaning heroin. It's like you're not in your right mind.
Well, when I get into that place, this really dark place, this unimaginable place, which is why I was so graphic and descriptive in the book, because I wanted the reader to believe they were in my shoes, to give a proper understanding and outlook on addiction, but more so humanizing it. Because the reality is when we're caught up in alcoholism and addiction, we're disconnected from reality and or abnormality, where the abnormal becomes the normal. So to you, when you want to shake me out of it and like, what's wrong with you? I love you. You're my son. You're my husband. You're my brother. I want to say, what the fuck's wrong with you? Don't you understand why a line of heroin is good for the body? Like, really?
You believed that?
It's in...
You couldn't have actually believed that.
Well, I mean, not quite to that, but like, you know, it just depends on the situational. You know, like if I'm an alcoholic and you, my wife, or just cannot understand why I need to have 2 shots of Jack before I drive to work in the morning, I will make you try to understand why that makes sense to me.
I think I'm guilty of speaking to people who've struggled with addiction and wanting to know the war stories and finding them fascinating. And you talk about this a lot, how you would become almost this heroic character because you're talking about your heroin addiction and people would sit around the campfire and want to hear your stories, right? For you, is that actually cathartic to work through, or are we celebrating an addict's journey a bit too much by delving into those stories?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm so glad you brought this to light, because what I know to be true today is everything is perspective, right? How do we look at things? How do we view things? And the reason that we're here today discussing the topic that we're talking about, which is addiction, which you came across through my book, Dreamseller. Dreamseller was not written because I wanted to be a writer. As a matter of fact, I didn't graduate high school. I got my GED in the penitentiary after Dreamseller was written. Wow. I had no desire to want to be an author at all. As a matter of fact, I wrote Dreamseller in pen and paper. But the reason why Dreamseller came to fruition and we're here today is you asked the question, am I guilty of wanting to hear the war stories? This is powerful. And I don't talk about this much. Bam, my best friend, who prior to extending this invite or offer, homeless heroin addict in Baltimore, my mother had bought me a plot. People were kind of just waiting for my death. Bam and I had grown up skating together and became like best friends. His career continued to excel and he became a household name. And I just became a ghost in Baltimore, living on the streets, prostituting my body to secure money to get more heroin. One day, Bam does a demo at a skate shop in Baltimore, asks if they've seen Novak. They say he comes in here occasionally. Here's my number. Give it to him next time you see him. Tell him if he wants to get clean and come to Westchester, call me. Series of events take place. I go in there, get the number. I call Bam. 3 months later, I'm living with him in Westchester, Pennsylvania. He has me on the TV show Viva La Bam. Now, every time we'd finish filming for the day, the cast and the crew, we would go to a bar and we'd sit at this table. And Bam was so fascinated about the stories that I had to share, the positions that I would end up in as a direct result of my addiction, the characters that were involved. He would have me recite these stories. And in a pub of a table of 30, as I'm telling these stories, you could hear a pin drop. Now, he, much like you, was very interested in the tales, the dark, tragic war stories per se.
Right.
And during me telling these stories, he said, you know what, Novak? New deal. Now, the deal prior to this was I could live in his house, I could be on the TV show, I could have a car, I could get a credit card, and I could get paid to be on the show. I just had to stay off of heroin and pills. New deal. You're going to write a book. You're going to write a book. You're going to carry around a pen and a paper, a notebook and a pen. The first time that I do not see you with that notebook and pen, even if you're not writing, the first time I don't see you carrying it in your hand, if it's not in your possession, you're going back to Baltimore. I was put in this position where I was like weighing the scales of justice, continue to be on this TV show, live in this mansion, become a household name, hopefully get paid, party, the whole Hollywood lifestyle, or go back to Baltimore and prostitute my body to get heroin. No brainer.
Right.
I wrote the goddamn book because it was born off of people wanting to hear my war stories.
Right.
And then the book ultimately became recently revised in its 12th edition. In the literary world, that's a pretty big deal. Books don't make it past their second or third.
Which
barely.
means there's an inherent fascination and interest in it.
But that's
universally.
Exactly. But it's also segued into it being widely spread in treatment centers, in jails, and people read these books and they're like, if you can do it, there's no reason why I can't. So what's your perspective? Are you guilty of wanting to hear war
Correct.
stories, or are you recognizing the synchronicity in life's events that have led us to the here and now that, see, God has been doing for me so much more, so much?
Well, I'm going to go with B.
You see what I'm saying?
Because I don't want to feel any guilt. But also, it's not like, Bam.
I get really deep into the spiritualistic
and I agree.
aspect of things.
So are you religious now or spiritual?
Not religious, but insanely spiritual.
Okay. And that.
But who am I to? Where is my spirituality if I judge your spirituality? Acceptance is the answer to everything.
Totally.
So
if it works
if you're
for you,
religious,
that's great.
yeah,
if there's
like
kindness
whatever,
and love and all that,
dude, do it.
I want to talk about Bam because obviously he's in the news every single day.
Yeah.
I find it so ironic, and I'm sure most readers do, that Bam spent most of his young life trying to keep you sober.
Yeah.
And now, look at he's making headlines. He's
in
actually in rehab right now.
Yeah, yeah.
What happened? How did he go so far the other direction when he was so anti-drug?
I think, again, when the disease of addiction and alcoholism is underestimated and you kind of just don't give it the respect that it deserves, and understanding how powerful it is and how progressive it becomes and how bad things get. And when you have this level of success as he did from such a young age, people kind of look at you from the perspective of there is a method to his madness. He knows what he's doing. He is successful by all means. He would never do that. And then for people like him and plenty of other people, you kind of get to a point in life where you drift so far out to sea because no one thought that it was alarming, because you're like this creative genius in a weird way that exhibits it through art, through skateboarding, through Jackass, through just
right. He's a genius.
Yeah.
Is he a genius? Would you say?
Absolutely.
He seems. I mean, the fact that he was
Absolutely.
able to tell you put your
To
work
write
down
that-
on paper,
yeah.
and he basically drove you to do this. Are you still talking to him today?
Not at the moment. He went to treatment. And again, this is not me standing from the top of my mountain professing that I have the answer to all. I'm married to my narrative and my story because it's mine and it's worked for me to this point. So I had to really come from a position of creating some boundaries.
Because it's not. I imagine that's triggering for you.
It's not triggering. It's just very. It's heavy and it can become draining and toxic, and when you're in a position of hurting people, hurt people.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had to love him from a distance, as he did with me when I was in active addiction. Although he would help me, I had to show some willingness to want to help myself before he would extend another offer.
But I look at this rehab with Lamar Odom, which, by the way, is treatment, or is it kind of, again, like we're trying to capitalize on somebody and their weakness, or no? I mean, do you see what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Is
I
it like,
do.
is the whole thing just one big show and facade? Like Lamar Odom, who was an addict, is now helping Bam Margera, and let's make a headline.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. In this harm reduction world that we're living in, there's no margin for error, yet it's impossible to do perfect. So my last facility that I went to cost $2 to get in. It was a state-funded place, and they were giving me used underwear from the basement in a donations box.
Oh my God.
Now,
Okay.
most people would say there's no way that anyone would stand a chance. As a matter of fact, the blinds on the window you were not allowed to open because they were selling heroin and cocaine right in
yeah.
front of the
Yep.
building. So like by most standards, they'd say you can't get clean or sober in a place like that. The reality is you can, and that's the complexity of the situation. It's not a black and white one size fits all.
But when you hear this and you see it, do you go, really? That's the direction he is
No,
going?
I'm not, because
Okay, you don't
right
judge it.
now where he's at is a much better place than where he was 2 days ago, which was like
When you say you're not talking, does that mean like it's been months, years, or recent?
we kind of cut communication. I'd say within the last 2 months.
Yeah.
You know, because his situation was just going in a way different direction than mine, and I attribute him and the kindness of his heart for me being sober today a pretty big part of that. You know, if he didn't extend that offer, I don't believe I'd be in that plot that my mother bought me that still
Right.
exists in Baltimore. So, but I also understand that, like, there has to be some repercussions from our actions.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you have to take some responsibility.
Yeah.
That's what I've said with addicts in my life.
Exactly.
I
Or really
feel-
with anybody in any walk of life.
yeah.
The moment that you stop pointing the finger outward, no matter if it's in business, if it's in personal, if it's in, sexual, whatever it is, the moment that you actually stop pointing outward and point it inward, you'll have a chance at like recouping.
I just feel so bad because I don't feel personally that deeply physically drawn to alcohol where I can't stop. But I love a glass of wine at the end of the day, whatever.
Sure.
I empathize with someone who struggles with addiction. That physical need and dependency you must feel.
Yeah.
That's got to be so hard. It's a daily battle and struggle for you. And I empathize.
What was
do.
really hard was not that part. Yes, that was the worst. That was an absolute nightmare. It made me dread every morning when my eyes opened, like another. But the worst part about that for me is because deep down inside, I was always a good person and I really meant well and never wanted to harm anybody. But when caught up in active addiction or alcoholism, and you are attempting to stand between me or my drink or drug, you
Take me
must and
down.
will go.
Yep.
You must and will go. And it's not personal. It's just business.
Right.
Right? Like I don't want to
You
fucking
become the most shrewd businessman
and
at that point.
I swear, I really love you. I care about you. I want you to be happy and want me, and I want us to be together. But like, not right now. Not right now.
So I remember also saying to somebody in my life who's had struggled with addiction for 20 plus years, I said, is this what you want your legacy to be? That we are on this earth for such a short time as is. Do you really want your mark left to be, he really struggled with addiction?
Sure.
I mean, how devastating. What a sad life. Thank goodness that person has now like kind of turned it around. But what are you hoping that your legacy is left as?
When I got sober in the beginning, they told me things like, you have the ability to create the environment that you seek. I was destined to die with a needle in my arm. My mother had bought me a plot. People had taken life insurance policies out on me. She had sold 3 homes to pay for me to go to 2 different treatment centers. At the end of my alcoholism, she would get on her knees and she would pray to God to either cure me or kill me, because she could no longer take the pain anymore. And she felt that it was best to buy me that plot, because she said, if she said to me, if I die, who will take care of you? Who will take care of you? And this is my mother, and I'm a 38-year-old man who is in a position in life where I'm so low that the curb looks like a skyscraper. And I couldn't understand how I had gotten there. But again, the pain became so great that for the first time in my life, I had this moment of clarity to see what my life really looked like was. And I was no longer fucking accepting of it. And not only did I defy odds, I defied logic. I had gotten sober and I had stayed sober to this point, thank God. And at that moment, when I found this freedom, when I found this peace, when I found this solitude, because my days used to look like not another day. Like, why did you wake? What? Come on. Like,
Did you fear dying? I mean,
no,
everyone else.
death was welcome for me.
It
Death was welcome.
So you're like,
what
if I
scared
don't
me,
wake up, it's. I know you were just saying that, but you were like, if I die, you had come to accept that.
and it wasn't even if it wasn't like I'm cool with it. What was nice and rewarding about the thought of if I actually died was that my loved ones could finally be at peace. Because
that's so
I could deal with
terrible.
hurting me, but I don't like hurting other people because genuinely I'm a good man and I was raised with values. And I knew that this was not my intended destination. And I couldn't understand how I had gotten here. But then when I found this sobriety and this peace, and because I wasn't scared into sobriety because of death. That was like a Monday morning cup of tea for me. What scared me into sobriety was not dying and waking up every day doing things against my will in order to obtain enough money to buy more drugs.
Just the
That
constant.
is literally.
Well,
so,
you start the book with a story about that. I mean,
my
how
worst
desperate
day.
it got. And I do think, just to wrap it up, that.
But real quick, so before
Yep.
when I
Oh.
found the sobriety, I vowed that I was going to devote my life to allowing people to see that there is a light at the end of this dark, drab tunnel. And that if I can do it, there's no reason why they can't. That's why I'm so upfront, I'm so transparent, and I'm so descriptive with my story. Because I want people to know that, like, your history does not have to dictate your future, but it can absolutely guide and direct it. And the moment that I admitted complete defeat was the exact moment I secured the ultimate victory. So it's like, if you're at that jumping off point where you realize that you cannot get yourself out of the position that you have created for yourself, reach out, man. Let's do this together. And that's why I've created. I just opened a treatment center
I
myself.
saw that.
It's now
In Philly.
in Wilmington, Delaware.
In Delaware, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I have these sober living houses, 65 beds, 6 houses, where the mission statement for me is I travel around and I raise money to provide scholarships for anyone in need. I refuse to let finances be a deterrent as to why somebody can't find a healthy, accountable, safe, structured place to sober in. So that's
Yeah.
I
That
am.
probably also helps keep you sober.
It all does. It all does.
I want to just really quickly wrap up on a high note too. Well, I guess that is a high note as well, literally.
Such a fitting word
No,
for this
but-
whole
no,
say. That's what we should title this. Wrapping it up on a high
High
note.
The high note.
The high
Funny.
note.
The high note. Would you guys go back and do a Jackass, or like, what if Bam comes out, God willing, and he's in a good place? Would you do another like Viva La Bam or anything like that? Get the guys together.
Possibly. It's just so hard to call it. For me, I'm like older, right? And
You're not like really that old, and you
but
look
I'm in
great,
bed by
Brandon.
like 9,
Same.
and I'm in the gym by 6, and so things have changed, times have changed, but absolutely, there was some of the best times of my life.
Yeah.
I've had some of the best times of my life with my friends and while getting loaded. I would not trade them in for the world.
Do you keep in touch with Bam's family?
Yeah.
And what do they? Or do they talk to him?
Everyone's just
all worried.
very worried and concerned, and it's coming from a place of love. But unfortunately, when people are caught up in a bad place, they generally tend to hurt the people they love the most by lashing out and saying and doing things. It's not the strangers that get the brunt of it, and that's what makes it difficult and tough, and really, like, are we fighting an unwinning battle? Now, to me, no. I believe in miracles because I am one.
You are one.
And I witness it take place daily. So, like, I continue to pray for him, and I'll be here for him, and I love him as much today as I did when he extended the offer to ultimately, like, save my life.
Wow. Now, if that ain't the tables turning.
Everybody gets a turn. Be careful what you ask for in this life, because you'll get it sometimes. You'll fuck around and get it.
Brandon Novak, thank you so much. Motivational speaker. You are a leader in sobriety and helping people get sober. You've got the new book. Do you want to do a quick shout out about the new book?
The Streets of Baltimore, which is the long-awaited sequel to Dreamseller. And it just came out in audio version, and I did the narration for it, and that was like a really overwhelming experience.
Cathartic?
Just, it was, I thought addiction was tiring. Like, dude, I don't sit anywhere in a booth for 8 hours or a chair. And,
the physical process.
Yeah, the process of like, I'm not a narrator. I don't do that. And I have
but you got a voice for it.
I've learned how to do it. And it's just like anything in my life. Now I think I'm the best narrator in the world. Like, why would you not want me to narrate the deal? I'll take it over, man. No, but the new book, Streets of Baltimore. But the thing that I'm most proud and impressed by is Redemption Addiction Treatment Center. It's the new facility that I've opened, and I want to extend this offer to anybody out there that feels like they're in a position that they might need a little assistance with, to reach me directly at 610-314-6747.
We'll put that number up too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Brandon, thank you so much. Steve, want to wrap with anything?
You are, because of your experiences, which people do want to hear about, depending on how we talk about you look at them, you're a wonderful conveyor of story. I don't know how else to say that. Like you say what you want. You're so smart and so talented and so interesting to listen to. So
and now for the war stories when the no, I'm kidding. We're gonna exploit you when the cameras are off. Okay,
let's do it. I'm easy, man. I'm fucking easy.
I know. I'll take it like that too. I'm like, you want it? I got it. You're gonna pay me good. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you so much.
No, this is rad.